However, due to his health issues, he confided in me that it was difficult to contribute any more money to the family. My father-in-law understands that Peter doesn't earn much, and considering the attitudes of both my mother-in-law and Peter, it wasn't an atmosphere where they could openly discuss it. Understanding my father-in-law's feelings, I decided to be a pillar of strength for this family. I could manage my father-in-law's caregiving while working from home, because I only need to support him when necessary. My mother-in-law left the caregiving to me and continued her life as if nothing had changed, doing housework and going out with her friends. Jessica, I'm sorry. If it wasn't for my bad back, I wouldn't have had to trouble you like this. Please don't apologize. You've worked hard for the family all this time. Now, please rest. My father-in-law smiled with relief at my words. But perhaps due to his previous overwork, he gradually lost his strength. When he and I went to the hospital for his checkup, we discovered that he had cancer, which was a shock to both of us. When I told my mother-in-law and Peter about the cancer, they were shocked. They bombarded him with questions about how long he had left and how much the treatment would cost. It surprised me that my mother-in-law and Peter, who hadn't talked much with my father-in-law since his health declined, suddenly showed an interest in talking to him. One day, when Peter was at work and my mother-in-law was out with a friend, my father-in-law spoke to me. The reason those two asked about my remaining time and treatment costs is probably because they're eyeing my inheritance. They must be planning to keep me in good spirits until I die, wondering how much I'll leave them. Jessica, this might cause you some discomfort, but I'm on your side. Thank you for not abandoning our family. As my father-in-law said, Peter and my mother-in-law seemed displeased that I spent a lot of time with him, and they started making snide remarks. Come to think of it, why does my daughter-in-law stay at home all the time without doing any housework? My mother-in-law started talking to Peter during dinner. Peter grimaced and replied, I don't know. She quit her job without telling me and started staying at home. It's really annoying. Maybe she came to this house aiming for Dad's money. They started saying such mean things right in front of me. We usually ate dinner with just the three of us, my mother-in-law, Peter, and I, as my father-in-law ate in his own room. Left without any support, I was forced to hear harsh words from both of them. I am working, I tried to argue, but was told, what are you talking about? You haven't worked since you came to this house. Don't lie when you haven't earned a single penny. The reason we can live comfortably is because Peter goes out and works for us. You do nothing all day and just idle around the house. They made these accusations without even checking what I was doing at home. Thinking that continuing my meal here would only result in more complaints, I decided to take the meal to my father-in-law's room. But at that moment, my mother-in-law snatched the tray from my hands. I have no intention of letting a woman like you, who's after my husband's money, serve him food. I will take it myself. I had been preparing nutritious meals based on my father-in-law's requests, but my mother-in-law pretended not to know that and tried to take the completed meal as if she made it by herself. I was disappointed in my mother-in-law's scheming and credit-stealing behavior. Thinking that arguing would only trouble my father-in-law, I said to my mother-in-law, please go ahead and let her serve the meal. Peter and his mother were trying to separate me from my father-in-law. Even when my father-in-law was hospitalized, I was not allowed to visit him. However, I was in contact with my father-in-law through my mobile phone. It seemed that Peter and his mother, fearing that I might inherit some of my father-in-law's estate since I had been caring for him, were trying to turn him against me. Despite the fact that it was Peter and his mother who were keeping me away from my father-in-law, I was disgusted to hear that they were saying I disliked taking care of him. It seems that my father-in-law just nodded along and ignored their words in order to protect me from further blame from them. Jessica, those two said you took money from the house and even talked about divorce. My father-in-law's message made me laugh. There had been no talk of divorce from Peter, and for some reason, they were not trying to kick me out of the house either. Perhaps they wanted to keep an eye on my movements. Since my father-in-law and I were close, they probably thought that if I was kicked out of the house, I would be free to go and visit him. Indeed, if I divorced Peter and was kicked out of the house, I would be free from their constraints and would visit my benefactor, my father-in-law. Peter and his mother seemed to understand me well. Afterwards, I continued my remote work, enduring criticism from Peter and his mother and keeping in touch with my father-in-law. However, half a year later, my father-in-law passed away. I busied myself with arranging the funeral in order to endure my grief. Peter and his mother did not help with the funeral arrangements, so I arranged things as my father-in-law had wished. About a week after the funeral, there was an incident. While I was working from home, Peter and his mother suddenly came into the room. They had never entered my room like this before, so I was surprised, but quickly saved my data and turned off my computer. What's wrong? Don't you realize what you're doing? I know you've been embezzling the household's money. It seems you also received money from my husband. What a despicable woman. What do you mean? I could not understand a word of what my mother-in-law was saying. I had never received any money from my father-in-law. I had no idea how there could be such a misunderstanding. In my confusion, Peter glared at me and then said, "You cozied up to my dad, showing off your youth to get his money. You betrayed me, your own husband." I wished he wouldn't make such baseless and dirty assumptions. I had always valued my relationship with my father-in-law and had sincerely taken care of him. I never did anything to cozy up to him. Aren't you misunderstanding? I never did anything like that. However, they didn't believe me. They began packing up my belongings without my consent. Wait a minute, please. You need to leave this house. I have prepared the divorce papers, so sign them quickly and then go turn them in. Peter yelled this, throwing the divorce papers at me. As expected, they were afraid I would visit my father-in-law in the hospital, and that's why they hadn't brought up divorce before. You are no longer needed in this house. Get out, you bum. My mother-in-law yelled at me, throwing clothes at me. Peter hurled insults at me, saying, "You freeloader," and handed me a pen to sign the divorce papers. After being treated so horribly, I knew there was no point in staying in this house. Since my father-in-law's funeral was over, I quickly signed the divorce papers. Okay, I'll leave. I'll pack my things myself so you don't need to help me. As I said that, Peter and his mother, who had no intention of helping, left the room looking relieved. I packed my belongings, found a new place to live, and promptly left their house. When I informed Peter and my mother-in-law that I had submitted the divorce papers, they were pleased. They would be having a hard time from here on out, so they should enjoy this moment while it lasts. Within a month of me leaving the house, Peter called. I was working and ignored his call, but later, I received an email from him. "Hey, all the money in the house is gone. You stole it, didn't you?" Now I was being accused of theft. I hadn't stolen anything. My father-in-law had kept the money securely, and there wasn't any readily accessible cash in the house, so even if they searched, they wouldn't find any. We should discuss the money when we talk about the inheritance. I replied to his email, but I received no reply from him. It seemed that he had completely forgotten about the inheritance discussion. After a while, I received contact about setting up a meeting regarding the inheritance. I had decided not to block their contact until I was called for such a meeting, so I headed to my former in-law's house as instructed. It's odd to call it my in-law's house since Peter and I are now divorced. When I arrived, my mother-in-law, Peter, and another man in a suit were waiting in the living room. When the man read the will, Peter and my mother-in-law turned pale.